The fainting, the morning dawned pale over the Blake mansion, as if the sun feared to cross those windows. Isabella walked lightly across the library, balancing a silver tray. The books, lined up like soldiers, maintained a hard and impeccable silence. She felt a deep tiredness, a sweet, strange weight at the base of her belly. He took a deep breath, feigning courage, and went back to polishing the cold marble of the table. In the hallway, the antique clock hammered out seconds like a sentence. Ethan Blake, aloof, reviewed contracts that we never consoled. The mansion was a mausoleum of life before, where morning shaped the air. Isabella avoided his eyes. The boss could see everything except people. The scent of wax and old dust created a scene of silence. In the cart, the tray flickered as dizziness came suddenly. A warm wave ran through his body, and the ground seemed to move away. She rested her hand on the bookshelf, feeling the world turn milky. Silver clattered to the floor, a metallic thunder in the heart of the house. Isabella tried to call out to someone, but her voice came out as a whisper. Ethan's footsteps cut through the hallway. Dry, impatient, he found Isabella on her knees, her face livid, her fingers trembling. "Get up," he said, without anger, but without heat, as if demanding orders. She tried to obey, but the world spun in an arc of shadows, and then he passed out. Surrendered to the darkness that came like a blanket, the team ran. Someone called the driver, someone brought water. The marble reflected harsh, fragmented light, like cracked ice. Isabella opened her eyes for a second, lost, wet with sweat. "I'm fine," he tried to lie, holding on to the silver cart. Ethan looked away, as if fragility were a crime. In the car, the road seemed endless, lanes sliding by like memories. Isabella felt her skin cold and her breathing short, measured in syllables. The driver avoided questions. In the mansion, curiosity was expensive. She touched her belly without thinking, a small, almost secret gesture. Outside, the city passed by like a silent film. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and hope measured in drops. A kind nurse tied her hair back, murmuring, "It'll be okay." Isabella nodded, her voice caught in a timid nod of fear. The white walls resembled empty pages waiting for news, and the news would come like a bolt of lightning, splitting the night in half. The doctor came in with a tablet and eyes that knew the pain. He examined, listened, asked short questions, took precise notes, and made firm gestures. Then, a silence that had the weight of an entire world. "Congratulations, Isabella. You're pregnant," he said with practiced gentleness. Her heart responded with a happy, terrified start. Tears rose, timidly, as if asking permission to exist. I work as a maid. I need the job," she stammered. The nurse squeezed his hand, as if holding a thread of light. Isabella repeated to herself, "I can do it, I can do it, I can do it." In the corridor, firm footsteps announced winter turning into summer. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his shadow taller than the door itself. The heavy gaze swept over the bed, gauging, measuring, judging. Isabella, in a surge of survival, whispered in a broken voice, "Please, don't fire me. I'm pregnant." A phrase Trine no ar, and the world, for an instant, was suspended between two destinies. The secret revealed, the sentence was still vibrating when Ethan's jaw tightened, cold as steel. "This is not a place for negotiations," he said, dashing any hope. The doctor tried to intervene, but the ice between the two was old. Isabella felt guilty for existing, as if asking for care was a crime. She took a deep breath, guarding her dignity like someone closing a safe. "I'm not negotiating, sir. I'm telling the truth." The monitor was ticking, a small drum of life. Ethan looked away from the screen, irritated by his own discomfort. "We'll talk again at home," he concluded, sealing the sentence. Isabella understood, the verdict was already ahead of the words. Back at the mansion, the hallway seemed longer than before. The employees whispered with their eyes, never with their mouths. Ethan asked everyone to leave, isolating the two in the lobby. Above, the chandelier poured out lights that didn't warm anyone. Isabella kept her spine straight, even as fear buckled her knees. "Do you think that shields you from responsibility?" he began. "Do you think I would believe in coincidences like that?" She opened her lips, but her voice came in a short, frayed thread. "I'm not asking for mercy. Just justice." The word echoed, displaced, like rain on a glass ceiling. Ethan walked through the lobby, hands in his pockets, restrained. in my house, there is no room for manipulation. He decreed, pack your things. The severance pay will be paid as required by law. Isabella closed her eyes for a second, so as not to break down, then he nodded, accepting the defeat he didn't deserve. She went up to the small room, where there was room for few dreams. He folded clothes delicately, as if folding memories. He kept his badge, his cracked mug, his notebook. Every object seemed to bid her farewell with a whisper. In the mirror, he promised, I will protect you, my love. At the gate, the rain began, punctual as a sad clock. The security guard avoided looking her in the eyes, offering her an umbrella. Thank you, she said, and thanked him for holding on. The bag weighed less than the newborn courage in her chest. The street, too big, became a map that she would have to learn. Ethan stood in the hall, surrounded by arrogant echoes. The resonance of her phrase struck, insistently, in the back of his mind. Please, don't fire me. I'm pregnant. What kind of man was he? The answer stung, and he buried it again, as he always did. He preferred contract to contact, power to empathy, order to care. On the bus, Isabella hugged her suitcase and her belly in silence. The city turned on its lights, and she looked for one among many. He thought about the rent, the job he didn't have yet, and tomorrow, but he also heard, inside, a heartbeat that called for courage. I can do it, he repeated, as if building a bridge over an abyss. When the door to the cheap apartment opened, a musty smell came. Isabella turned on the light and swept the floor with a weary look. He put the suitcase down, closed his eyes and let the tears fall, not from weakness, from relief that I was still standing, and he promised, between sobs, no one will silence me anymore. The humiliation, the next morning dawned harshly, with a gray, heavy sky. Isabella arrived early at the mansion to terminate her contract. The corridors whispered footsteps that were no longer hers. The administrator was waiting with a folder and a protocol, everything very clean, very correct, very merciless. Ethan walked down the stairs like a moving verdict. There was no fury, there was something worse. Icy conviction. He asked the employees to gather in the lobby. I wanted to make it clear that the rules applied to everyone, and he confused justice with a display of control. Isabella is no longer part of the team, he announced firmly. I hope you respect the decision and remain at your posts. No one dared to raise their head to question. The woman in the kitchen pressed a cloth between her fingers. A thick silence covered everyone's shame. Isabella maintained her posture, even with her heart aching. Thank you for the opportunity, she said, her voice trembling. Each word was a brick holding up a dam. She wouldn't beg again, not with an audience. His gaze sought the door as one seeks air. The administrator handed over the termination envelope. It's all here, including proportional benefits. She received it with firm hands, like someone receiving the wind. The signature slipped onto the paper like a quiet goodbye. The chandelier snapped overhead, as if confirming the end. Ethan noticed the slight tremor in her fingers. For an instant, a memory of his wife flashed. Compassion, that foreign word, asked for a visa, but he deported her before he actually entered, and he turned his face away so as not to see his own flaw. As Isabella crossed the garden, the sky gave way. Large drops fell, washing away dust and pride. She lifted her chin, refusing the shelter of the porch. Getting wet seemed more honest than feigning indifference. Freedom tasted like water. And salt. At the gate, a security guard muttered, I'm sorry. She smiled small, as if forgiving the world. I knew that the error was not everyone's, but one's, and sometimes many pay for the silence of one. He left without looking back, so as not to lose heart. Inside the mansion, the team dispersed without comment. Ethan returned to the office, where his version of events fit. He piled up tasks until he buried any doubt. The polished silver tray reflected a single man. He didn't have the courage to hold his own reflection. Isabella, outside, took 5 breaths, first for survival, then for the child, third for dignity, fourth for hope, fifth for all the invisible women he knew, and he continued, with the rain applauding his steps. The beginning of loneliness. The one-room apartment welcomed her with sincerity. There was mold on the walls and drafts in the cracks. There was also silence, which she filled with plans. Isabella hung 2 pictures and a stubborn will. He called that cube of air our home. The bills lined up on the table like paper soldiers: rent, electricity, gas, food, prenatal care. With the termination, I could breathe for a month and a half. After that, only work and miracles would do the trick. She chose to believe both, just in case. The next morning, he looked through advertisements in a worn notebook, temporary and daily vacancies, sewing, office cleaning. He called 3 numbers and walked to 2 addresses. He received 2 "will call you later" and 1 "who knows." He kept the "who knows" like someone keeping a match. At night, the baby moved like a little fish in a pond. Isabella stroked her belly and whispered promises. "I will succeed, even if it costs me to learn everything." Fear and courage shared the same cup. She drank both, without sugar, until the end. He bought cheap fabrics and thread at a corner shop. He sewed cushion covers, trouser hems, and small repairs. He left a note at the reception offering service. The neighbors began to knock on his door timidly. Each coin seemed like a seed of the future. At the same time, she enrolled in a short carer course, night class. Demanding instructor, straightforward content, learned how to measure pressure, correct transfer position. He also learned to speak with pain using gentle words. He discovered that care is a language that everyone understands. Meanwhile, Ethan lived in a taller, emptier castle. Doctors suggested rest, but he chose work. The blame was a busy schedule with meaningless hours. At night, the silence bit like a hungry animal. He fed the animal with memories of the loss. One afternoon, Isabella was breathless when faced with the prices at the market. The world fit into a bag of bread and 3 pieces of fruit. Even so, he bought a small sunflower for the window. Flowers are maps that point to the sun. And she needed some bright direction. The first larger sewing orders arrived. He doubled deadlines, stitched together dreams, and chopped up tiredness. While sewing, she listened to podcasts about nursing. I practiced knots, folds, touches, patience and technique. She transformed fabric and, at the same time, transformed herself. When he got the call from the care agency, he smiled. "We have a temporary vacancy for home monitoring." He wrote down the address, the time, and the price per shift. He thanked her with a voice that fits in his entire chest, without knowing that destiny was drawing the same circle. The accident, the night fell heavily, with thunder streaked in silver. Ethan drove fast, trying to beat the clock in his mind. The rain washed the city but did not wash away memories. On the radio, a presenter was talking about traffic and patience. He had one thing and lacked another. The curve arrived earlier than it should have. The tires bit into the water and skidded in the dark. A flash of headlights, a brake that came late. The metal screamed, the glass became a cruel constellation, and the world stopped in a snap that seemed infinite. Silence, then sirens, then bowed faces. Ethan tried to move his legs and found a wall. The pain rose in waves, breaking old promises. Someone held his hand with practiced firmness. "Stay with me, breathe with me," a calm voice commanded. In the hospital, white lights ripped through the hallway. Exams, questions, protocols, consents. The word temporary was said with medical care. Injury, rest, physiotherapy, wheelchair for now. For now, 2 oceans fit into this interval. Ethan stared at the ceiling as if reading a sentence. The man who controlled everything did not control his own body. Loneliness sat beside him. Crossing her legs, he dismissed calls, refused visits, and forbade flowers. He preferred the harsh to any kindness that hurt. The following days arrived without asking permission. He learned to ask for help to get up. Something he had never done before. Hands, accustomed to signing, learned to hold bars. A world of small gestures required new courage, and each gesture was charged with interest of pride. The doctor spoke slowly about rehabilitation and time, that currency he always had in excess. Now every minute was worth gold dust. Ethan looked out the window and counted the drops. The rain, relentless, seemed like a clock without hands. The team discussed discharge, adaptation, home care. Someone patient, firm, professional was needed. The agency secured a list of competent names, temporary caregivers, with recent experience. They said. He signed without reading. He just wanted to escape from the hospital. As the wheelchair turned down the high hallway, Ethan felt the ground approaching in a new way. The height of the world had changed before his eyes. Each doorstep became a mountain, each carpet became a sea. He took a deep breath, trying to grasp his own weight. On the way out, the rain eased, but not inside him. The adapted car was waiting, as was the driver. There was an address, there was a house, there was an emptiness, and there was a vacancy. A caregiver, a name to come, fate. Wrote without trembling, reunion. The unexpected encounter, Isabella woke up before the alarm, her heart beating double time. He checked his bag, gloves, alcohol, measuring cup, notebook. She tied up her hair, breathed for a count of 5, and smiled in the mirror. Professional, he said to himself, as if putting on armor. The baby responded with a C movement, the agency's address shone on the paper like an omen. She took the bus and counted street corners like rosary beads. Along the way, he studied protocols and remembered gentle touches. Caring is a verb of presence, he repeated silently, and he promised not to let the pain from before drive his hands. The mansion's tall gate looked like a sleeping animal. Isabella stopped, her breath short, her memory on alert. The intercom chimed, asked for a name, and confirmed registration. She almost backed away, but planted her feet on the ground. "I'm the temporary caregiver," she said without trembling. The hall swallowed her with the smell of wood and the past. The administrator led her through familiar corridors. Each painting was a memory kept in a frame. "He's in the rehabilitation room," he informed bureaucratically. Isabella nodded, her heart pounding, her steps measured. When the door opened, time split in half. Ethan, in the wheelchair, looked up and froze. In his eyes, astonishment, shame and a cracked mirror. In hers, the discipline of someone who learned to fall on their feet. "Mr. Blake," she said, her tone professional, unmistakable. The silence first was a very long corridor. "Can we start by evaluating the transfer?" she proposed. Ethan cleared his throat, gathering up shards of pride. "Yes," he replied, and the word felt like surrender. The air moved again, following its routine. Isabella checked the height of the chair, locks, supports. He explained each step before touching, asking for permission. The technique was safe, the touch impersonal and respectful. Ethan felt a firmness in the hands he had despised. And he understood that dependence is also a form of courage. On the first transfer, his body wobbled. She supported the trunk, guided the weight. Anchored breaths. "Count to 3 with me," he asked, his voice a port. On 3, he stood up a hand's breadth from himself, and he landed, whole, without pain, lighter than before. After the exercise, she recorded signs and directions. He proposed small goals, scope, balance, tolerance. He spoke of discipline without humiliation, of progress without haste. He listened, for the first time, to understand and not to respond. The rehab room smelled like the beginning. At the end of the shift, Isabella collected the materials. Ethan, restrained, just said, "Thank you, nurse." She nodded, keeping her distance and peace at the same time. In the hallway, he took a breath. It was just work. It was what was necessary, and fate, discreetly, closed the door carefully. Pride and pain. The next morning brought a timid sun filtered through thick curtains. Isabella arrived punctually, her posture straight, her expression neutral. Ethan waited with a closed face, practicing restraint. The wheelchair seemed smaller than his pride, but this time, he said good morning without stumbling. She started with shoulder and spine stretches. He explained each movement, mapping limits and possibilities. Ethan answered precisely, teeth gritted with every effort. Between one exercise and another, the silence had new textures, neither hostility nor kindness, no man's land. When she asked him to rate his grip strength, he hesitated. "I don't like feeling tested," he said dryly. Defensively, "Neither do I," he replied, surprising himself with his own frankness. "But that's how we measure the path." Hands met in the center of a brief truce. The session progressed in small, invisible gains. Ethan found that controlling his breathing helped with the pain. Isabella noticed better posture when she returned to her chair. The science of care has brought two distant continents closer together, and for a moment, there was no master or maid. During the break, the administrator entered with documents, pending matters, suppliers, renovations, urgent decisions. Ethan signed impatiently. Remembering who he was, Isabella took 2 steps back and watched silently. Power also staggers when it underestimates the body. Back to the exercises. Impatience got in the way. "Faster," he urged, trying to set the pace. "Safer," she corrected, maintaining her clinical cadence. His eyes flashed, but subsided without a scene. "Leading, sometimes, is learning to follow." Isabella adjusted the footrest, preventing pressure. He explained about friction injuries, hydration, rest. Ethan listened like someone receiving flight instructions. "I didn't like to depend But I liked results. Pride and pragmatism negotiated a white flag. At the end, she wrote down goals for the week. Balance sitting for 1 minute without support, he wrote. He frowned, finding it both too little and too much at the same time. Small victories pay big bills, she said, and for the first time, he actually smiled. In the hallway, they crossed paths with the kitchen employee. Her gaze landed on Isabella with respect. Ethan noticed that gesture and felt something shift. Perhaps the world saw in her what he refused to see. Perhaps he should study this evidence further. As she said goodbye, Isabella adjusted the strap of her bag. See you tomorrow, Mr. Blake. Professional, firm, distant. See you tomorrow, Isabella. Human, restrained, almost grateful, each word held a story that did not yet exist, and the mansion breathed a millimeter lighter. Open wounds. The session began with transfers and parallel bars. Ethan was anxious, wanting to speed up progress. Today I want to lift more time, he announced, inflexibly. Let's see what the body allows, Isabella pondered. The room seemed to shrink between anticipation and caution. He tried to get up before the agreed count. The trunk swayed, the support failed, the pain bit fast. Stop. She ordered, holding him tightly and skillfully. Ethan lost his composure and became ashamed. The defeat ignited an old anger in his chest. You're holding me back, he snapped, sharp and cutting. The sentence hurt like a blade rubbed on a scar. Isabella breathed, counting to 5. As she had learned, I'm protecting you from an injury that would set you back months. The truth was left in the middle, waiting for someone to choose it. He turned his face away, eyes wet with frustration. I can't stand looking weak, he confessed, almost in a whisper. Asking for help is not weakness, it's method, she said. I learned this from this side of pain. And for a second, she almost trembled too. Isabella straightened her shoulders and resumed the exercise. This time, he explained the steps like a reliable map. Ethan followed the count, controlling his haste with effort. The body responded better, millimeters of victory. The two heard the silence say like this. As he rested, he stared at his hands, which were shaking slightly. You speak as if you know this house inside out, he said. I know the houses where I worked, she replied carefully, and the pains that live in them. He felt the phrase open windows he had kept closed. The session ended with stretching and ice. Isabella wrote everything down in her notebook in neat handwriting. Ethan noted the attention to detail, the impersonal care. It had dignity, a word that was rare there. He found himself wanting to deserve her. While collecting the materials, she dropped her badge. Ethan bent down as low as he could and grabbed it first. Fingers touched in a neutral, unromantic gesture. Even so, something stuck like water on stone. Respect is the first step on any bridge. When she was about to leave, he called her by name, Isabella. Thank you for today. The voice was deep. You're welcome, Mr. Blake. We'll continue tomorrow. She smiled sideways, without promises or regrets. The hallway seemed shorter until the door. Alone, Ethan stared at his own reflection in the glass. He recognized a man in repair, not in ruin. He remembered how she had restrained him before he fell, and he decided to trust the process an extra inch. Sometimes healing hurts less than resisting. Memories of the past. The afternoon fell in a shy gold over the rehabilitation room. Isabella adjusted the bars, tested the locks, checked the stopwatch. Ethan waited in silence, breathing in the learned cadence. The air smelled of polished wood and freshly cut ice. Everything seemed under control, until the past entered uninvited. In the hallway, an employee carried an old photo frame. The dark frame shone like a well-varnished night. Isabella recognized the object before seeing the image. The heart, that archer, shot arrows without a target. You can leave it here, said the administrator, distracted. The photograph landed on the table next to the bars, two brothers smiling on the edge of a pier. Distant summer, Ethan more serious, Matthew with a laugh that lit up the banks. Isabella stared at Matthew's face and gasped. A sweet, painful memory crossed his skin. Ethan noticed the change in her eyes, a brief eclipse. Do you know this place? He asked, trying to sound casual. Isabella blinked, lifting the shield of professionalism. It looks nice, he replied, putting the photo aside, but the hand lingered a second longer on the glass. They returned to the exercise. Time in steps counted. 3, 2, 1, she guided, firm, technical, present. Ethan lifted his torso with precision and less trembling. The body obeyed, the mind did not. the photograph stretched out questions like clothes on a clothesline. During the break, Isabella arranged banners and pillows. A smile from Matthew, old as the yellow light, persisted. His voice seemed to whisper from the other side of the portrait, "Live lightly, Isa." The memory bit with affection and guilt. She took a deep breath and changed the subject in the silence. Ethan approached the picture frame, careful with his hands. Summer at Lake Ashland. "Our dad took this picture." The information passed through Isabella like a pent-up noise. "Beautiful," he repeated, and the word sounded too short. The name of the lake opened maps she couldn't show. The session resumed with side steps, focus and balance. Isabella drove without trembling. Even though it was raining inside, Ethan heard a delicate distance in her voice, neither neglect nor fear, protection with a short noose. The portrait waited, straight, like a patient judge. When they closed the register for the day, the corridor emptied. Isabella collected the photo and lined it up with other memories. His fingers discreetly traced Matthew's smile. Ethan, watching, swallowed questions like bitter pills. The past had asked for passage, it had not yet taken a toll. As she said goodbye, Isabella avoided windows and mirrors. The belly responded with a light, tidal movement. "I know," he whispered, to someone who couldn't hear. On the other side, Ethan stood in front of the photograph. And he decided, tomorrow, the questions would be less icy. The silent confession. Night settled on the mansion like a wrinkleless sheet. Ethan couldn't sleep, the photo facing him. Matthew's laughter seemed to light up the edges of the room. Memories came flooding back. Small fights, big hugs. The "what if" became an insolent guest in his thoughts. Isabella, in the apartment, sat near the window. The city stored its noises in light boxes. The baby moved as if answering a question. She rubbed oil on her belly, an old gesture of care, and he promised again, "I will protect you, no matter what." On the next shift, the house woke up light gray. Isabella arrived early, preferring the silence of the corridors, organized materials, checked notes. Prepared the warm-up. Ethan appeared with a tired face and a decision. The picture frame. "Can we leave it here today?" he asked. She nodded, placing the photo on the side table. It didn't ring for more than a second and a half. "Let's start with breathing and lateral reaching," he said. The technique served as a bridge over a deep river, and the two walked through it with measured steps. Halfway through the session, a light bulb flickered and then steadied. Ethan lost his rhythm, memory swallowing his focus. Isabella supported the trunk, firm as the edge of a dock. "Breathe with me, 3 beats, he instructed. Without drama, the body found a safe place to land. Then she wrote down numbers, range, time, pain perception. The round handwriting also seemed to organize feelings. Ethan watched, remembering Matthew's crisp handwriting in the letters. The parallel hit him like a wave on a windy morning. "You knew my brother?" he finally asked slowly. The air changed density, as it did before it rained. Isabella kept her eyes on the notebook for a moment. "The Matthew I knew couldn't fit in a photo." The sentence chose to come out with care and respect, and it landed between the two like a watchful bird. Ethan felt his stomach tighten into a childish knot. "I'm sorry. That wasn't a fair question." Isabella closed the notebook and rested her hands in her lap. Some stories hurt to be born before their time. Silence, then, made a cradle for truth. At the end of her shift, she slowly put away materials. Alone in the hallway, she stopped before the portrait once more. The palm touched the glass, lightly, as if blessing, and, believing that no one was listening, he said to the belly, "Your father was light on a cloudy day, my love." Ethan, behind the half-open door, heard the tide rise. The name father echoed inside like distant bells. The photograph, he testifies, shone in the corner of the room. He said nothing. He learned not to say anything for a moment, and I knew, the next conversation would not be half-hearted. The rejection. The morning dawned cold, a kind of silence living among the furniture. Ethan woke up with the weight of a truth he still couldn't handle. Isabella's words spun around in her head like a pent-up echo. "Your father was light on a cloudy day." Impossible to pretend you didn't hear. Now, the past and the present shared the same roof. Isabella arrived punctually, her eyes tired but firm. Ethan watched her as she prepared the equipment. He wanted to talk, he wanted to understand, but he chose the wrong path. "So it's true? The child you're carrying is my brother's?" The sentence came out dry, without the filter that the heart deserved. she froze for a moment. The air rushing out in gasps. You weren't supposed to find out like this. Like what? Like someone who is deceived in their own home. There was no mistake, sir. Just fear. Ethan stepped back, surprised by the courage in her gaze. Afraid of what? Of being judged. He pressed tensely. Fear of being destroyed, she replied, without raising her voice. Matthew and I loved each other. But the world wouldn't understand. Ethan laughed, not in humor, but defensively. And you thought hiding would be the solution? The silence between the two became dense, cutting, personal. I didn't come here to justify myself. I came here to work. She gathered up her notebook and materials and straightened her posture. No need anymore, he replied, without thinking. Hurt, the words cut through the air like shattering glass. Isabella took a deep breath, holding back tears that begged for freedom. It's okay, Mr. Blake. I've had worse goodbyes. She gathered up her gloves, closed her bag, and walked to the door. I hope you recover. I really do. The goodbye came simple, mature, devastating. Ethan stood still, trying to justify his own venom. Anger was a mask for an old, inherited guilt. He felt like a lost child in Matthew's absence. He thought of his brother, always light, always easy to laugh. He thought about how he himself had chosen to be a shadow. The wheelchair felt heavier at that moment. He tried to get up on his own, but his body didn't respond. It was as if the house itself held him hostage to arrogance. You'd leave me too, wouldn't you, Matt? He murmured, and the tears that never came finally abated. Isabella, already at the gate, looked back one last time. The mansion seemed smaller, the sky immense. Inside her, a mixture of relief and ancient sadness. Freedom always comes with emptiness. But she knew, she had survived again. From the top of the window, Ethan watched her silhouette disappear down the street. For a moment, he wanted to run after her. But his body stopped him. Perhaps the body only reflected the still, paralyzed soul. The truth had arrived. But he still didn't know how to use it, and love, there, waited patiently for the time to return. The realization, night arrived carrying a gale that swayed curtains. Ethan, alone, walked through the library with the sound of his chair scraping. The books, witnesses to old truths, seemed to watch him. On the table, Matthew's portrait looked at him tenderly. You knew, didn't you? He murmured, his voice breaking. He picked up an old wooden box, kept since the funeral. Inside, yellowed letters, a broken watch, and an unopened letter. He recognized his brother's lively handwriting, the free, unpretentious stroke. His hands were shaking as he opened the envelope. The paper exuded longing, ink and time. Dear Ethan, the letter began, I don't know if I'll be there when you read this. I found someone who makes me believe in life again. She's simple and genuine. It taught me that love doesn't need to be understood, just lived. If I ever pass away, I hope you take care of her as you would take care of me. The last blurred line said more than any whole word. Ethan pressed the paper to his chest and closed his eyes. Regret came like a tide, strong, inevitable, absolute. Isabella wasn't a mistake, she was Matthew's last request, and he, blinded by pride, hurt her as he had hurt himself. The sound of thunder made him open his eyes and decide. The next morning, he asked the driver to take him to the clinic. The wheelchair rocked with the rhythm of the jolts. In the window, the city looked new, alive, full of patches. I need to see her, he said, without further explanation. For the first time, he spoke with a bare heart. She arrived at the small clinic where Isabella now worked. The white walls smelled of care and beginnings. She, in a simple lab coat, was attending to an elderly lady. When it saw him, time hesitated before moving on. Mr. Blake? She asked, surprised but without rancor. Ethan, please, he corrected humbly. I need to ask you something. Which isn't easy. She crossed her arms, protective, firm. If it's about the job, there's nothing more to talk about. It's not about the job, he replied, his voice low. It's about me. She took a breath, taking in the man before her, less arrogant, more human. I found Matthew's letter, he began. He asked me to take care of you. And I failed. Isabella's eyes welled up before she could stop them. You didn't fail. You were just too hurt to see. The silence that followed was the purest of dialogues. No words would fit there without breaking the moment. Ethan lowered his head and let the tears do the work. I'm sorry. For everything. For me. For him. Isabella nodded, without heroism, just compassion. On the way out, he looked at her with new sincerity. If there is still space, I want to start over, without uniform, without walls. She held up the badge, a symbol of the past, and smiled slightly. New beginnings are not asked for, they are built. And for the first time, the two walked in the same direction. The request for forgiveness. The day dawned bright, with a gentle courage in the air. Ethan trained alone, repeating the count he learned. Each thrust of the arms was a new sentence to say. He took Matthew's letter and put it in his inside pocket. He also took with him the right weight of words. At the clinic, Isabella finished measuring a patient's blood pressure. The wall clock marked calm, measured steps. Ethan waited, respecting the time he had previously ignored. When she approached, there was no stage, just the floor. I came to ask for forgiveness, he said, without shields. Isabella maintained her posture, but her eyes softened. Ask for forgiveness from whom? She asked. Sincerely and attentively, to you. To Matthew. To me, for betraying me with my pride. He took a deep breath, his voice finding a center. I don't want a shortcut, I want a path. He took out the letter and placed it on the counter, open. Isabella recognized the letter she had already kept in her chest. The shaky lines seemed to embrace the two of them again. He trusted you, he murmured, touching the paper, and I trust when the truth comes like this. I don't expect you to work for me again, Ethan said, even if I accept any proposal that seems like a quick fix. I only ask for a chance to be someone you don't fear. The request was between the two, clean, without embellishments. Silence responded first, then the heart. I have limits, Ethan, she said firmly, without harshness, and I have a baby coming. My peace is what I protect. I want to protect this peace too, he promised quietly. No rush. No debt. No spectacle. And for the first time, the promise didn't ring empty. They walked through the clinic's small courtyard. The shadows of the trees drew maps on the ground. Matthew taught me to laugh at the impossible, said Isabella. You taught me to breathe when it hurt, Ethan said. Maybe we can add up the lessons. A light wind turned the page of the letter as a blessing. Isabella caught the paper before it flew away. I'm open to talking. Outside of work. In a neutral place. Ethan smiled with his eyes, holding back the urge to thank him too much. Corner Cafe. Corner Cafe. At the cafe, the small table received two simple cups. They talked about small things, fare, bus, books. They walked through big themes with small steps, and they discovered that respect is a towel that doesn't stain. When they said goodbye, there was something new in the air, space. In the evening, Ethan trained again, more steadily. The letter was left on the bedside table, the lamp open to the point. Isabella, at home, kept the old badge in a box. Thank you for today, she whispered to her sleeping belly. Outside, fate beckoned silently. The new beginning. The following weeks arrived at a leisurely pace. Ethan followed rehabilitation with humble discipline. Isabella adjusted shifts, appointments, rest periods, and nesting. Meetings at the cafe became a habit without urgency. They talked more about gifts than scars. One afternoon, the doctor confirmed, consistent progress. With training, you'll be able to walk again, he said cautiously. Ethan nodded, not promising any dates to his own ego. I want to be ready for when the baby arrives, he said. The sentence warmed the ground beneath both of their invisible feet. Isabella packed her hospital bag with practical sweetness. Little clothes, a blue jumpsuit. Diapers laid out, one picture of Matthew, another of a stubborn sunflower. In the mirror, she saw a woman who had learned to choose herself, and he smiled, completely, without asking permission. In the mansion, paintings changed place and meaning. Ethan brought flowers into the living room, opened old curtains. The dusty piano received fingers that dared to play. A simple melody filled the stored space. The house took a deep breath for the first time. On the night of the scare, the bag broke with a wet whisper. Isabella called her neighbor, checked her documents and calmed down. The driver sent by Ethan was already waiting on the street. At the hospital, the staff recognized firmness and tenderness. Ethan arrived a few minutes later, hands shaking. labor happened like an obedient tide. Isabella breathed in waves, teaching her body to make way. Ethan offered his hand, not as owner, but as harbor. You can do it, he repeated, learning to be useful. I can do it, she replied, possessing her own courage. When the cry was born, the world became clearer. A boy, warm and whole, landed on Isabella's chest. Ethan cried unashamedly, dislodging years of stone. Hello, little Matthew. She whispered, unafraid of the name. The baby grabbed a finger and grabbed a future with it. In the bedroom, the morning light embroidered promises on the walls. Ethan brought a simple gift, handmade blue slippers. I learned from a video and a lot of persistence, he confessed, laughing. Isabella looked at the crooked and perfect work as a new beginning. It's the most precious gesture I've ever received, she said, emotionally. Days later, they walked slowly through the mansion's garden. The baby carriage glided like a boat on a calm lake. I don't want you coming back as an employee, Ethan said. I want you to come back if you want, as part of our home. Isabella breathed. Peace has the sound of choice. She touched the cart, looked at the boy, and finally, the mansion. I'll be back. But with new rules, respect, truth, limits. Yes, Ethan replied, without hesitation, completely committed. The wind shook the leaves as if applauding, and the new beginning finally found an address. The cure, time passed with the gentleness of someone who learned not to run. The mornings in the mansion stopped being cold and started to smell of bread. Isabella walked with the baby in her arms, humming softly. Ethan, now standing, watched her from the balcony with a tight smile. The house, once a tomb of memories, had become the shelter of life. The physiotherapy was over, but the learning continued. Ethan walked with a slight hesitation, as if respecting the ground. Each step was a silent prayer for forgiveness received. He no longer saw Isabella as an employee, nor as salvation. I saw her as an equal, a partner in the weight and lightness of scars. In the library, Matthew's portrait had found a new place. Now, next to another, Isabella smiling with the baby. Ethan dusted with his own hands, without delegating. You kept your promise, brother, he would sometimes murmur, and, in silence, I felt my heart respond with peace. Isabella alternated between breastfeeding and light sewing. She sewed baby clothes and memories that once hurt. The boy grew up surrounded by gentle voices and new stories. No one there talked about guilt. They talked about continuation. It was as if Matthew's love still blew through the cracks. One afternoon, Isabella found him in the garden, looking at the horizon. What are you thinking about? He asked, adjusting the baby's blanket. I think I wasted years trying not to feel. He replied, and the day I asked you for forgiveness was the first day I lived again. She smiled, not out of vanity, but out of mutual recognition. I needed to forgive you too, Ethan, he said calmly, not for you, but for me, so I can move on in one piece. He looked at her as if learning the meaning of the word redemption. The wind blew the leaves and carried away the last trace of sorrow. Thank you for teaching me what even money can't buy, he said. At night, they ate dinner together on the porch, with the baby sleeping beside them. They talked about small dreams, planting trees, opening a daycare center. Ethan proposed funding courses for vulnerable women. I want other Isabellas to have chances before the pain, he said. She squeezed his hand, and the gesture was worth 1,000 promises. Time flowed like a calm river, without urgency, without haste. The baby took his first steps to the applause of both. Ethan lifted him into the air, laughing with a joy he had long forgotten. Look, he walks, he exclaimed, and the tears came like a celebration. He walks, Ethan. And so do you, Isabella replied, emotionally. The scene was simple, but it carried the weight of 1,000 cures. 3 lives intertwined by loss, courage and new beginnings. The past still lived there, but now it slept in peace. The future, for the first time, didn't scare anyone. Hope had a face, a name, and a pair of curious eyes. In the last light of day, Isabella closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The mansion was alive, full of footsteps and laughter. Ethan hugged her from behind, the baby between them, the glue that held everything together. She whispered, softly, like a final prayer, sometimes love appears when pride can no longer command. Sometimes life doesn't destroy, it teaches. Isabella lost her job, but found courage. Ethan lost control and discovered his heart. 2 broken paths crossed to show that love is not born of perfection, but of repentance. because loving is not dominating, it is caring, and forgiving isn't forgetting, it's choosing to move on without carrying the weight of the past. The mansion that was once silent became a home, and pride, which once shouted the loudest, learned to be silent in the face of love. This story is about falling and having the strength to get back up, about being judged and still being good. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, because here, every story is a reminder that the pain passes, but the love that is born from it remains.